Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for inviting me, Asvar, the Nutshell team, and all delegates for being here. Let me start with a quote that I find very interesting, which is, "At present, we are stealing the future, selling it in the present, and calling it gross domestic product." It's a quote by Paul Hawken. He's an author, entrepreneur, environmentalist. And I think that we need a change. I was actually in Pakistan living with my family from 2015 to 2018 as I was running Nestle for Pakistan and Afghanistan. At that time, I was one of the projects we had was introducing microcredit to 100,000 dairy farmers with Telenor, with Michael, who's actually also in the room. And I had also the honor of being the president of OICCI in 2018. So I'm going to be talking about how do we do business in a way that creates a win-win-win for the organization, for the communities, as well as for the planet. So my background is actually multicultural. This is a picture of my parents, my wife, and myself. You can see we're dressed in the Dutch traditional clothes, but my mother is actually French and my wife is Indonesian. I studied in France and then built my career across different countries, moving from Indonesia to Vietnam, to the Philippines, to Switzerland, to Central Africa. Then I came here to Pakistan, South Africa, and I'm now based in the UAE. So my thoughts and experience are a combination of Dutch ingenuity combined with the wisdom from the developing world. So the theme for the conference is to take a step back, rise above, look beyond the big picture. So I think in terms of what is wrong with the way we do business today, we have to go back to this very famous quote from Henry Ford, where he said any customer can have any color he wants for his car as long as it's black. So of course Henry Ford set up the assembly line that was highly focused and highly efficient. And don't get me wrong, of course, this way of doing business led to a lot of prosperity in the world, but is also partially to blame in us being stuck now and knowing how to move from here. But I have a proposal to make to all of you. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah. Oh. Yeah, so Dana already talked about that it's actually not all bad and what progress mankind has been making over the last so many decades. And indeed, if you haven't read the book yet, I highly recommend that you read Factfulness by Hans Rosling, because he cuts through all the negative attention in the media and he gives the facts and his 10 reasons that demonstrate that our world actually has been improving, uplifting a lot of people out of poverty on the healthcare side, etc. But that is not to say that all is good and well. And I think our way of operating has now moved to a point that we see the limitations. And if we don't change quickly, what we saw in Pakistan last year with a huge flood affecting more than 30 million people is unfortunately something that will happen time and time again across the world. And it's not only in Pakistan that people are unhappy. People are demonstrating all over the world, and they do see capitalism as one of the issues. But what is the alternative? And I think that if we look at our problems, the world needs a massive wake-up call. We're sitting on a sitting time bomb, and in fact, we call it a polycrisis. as we're facing so many issues, not only the global warming, but also water depletion, soil depletion, geopolitical issues, all the inequalities. So we need to do something. And again, I think that there is hope. The question is, if we all realize that we have issues, what are we going to do about it? And in this book, The 4,000 Weeks, basically talks about that we all have more or less 4,000 weeks on the planet. And the question is, how do you want to use your time? What's the legacy you want to build? How do you want to move forward? And I believe that as leaders, we cannot control the conversations, but at least we can and we should influence the conversations and do it through our actions. If we look at leaders and where the leadership should come from, unfortunately, we very often have leaders, both in business as well as in politics, that have questionable moral compasses. And I feel also that there is too much of focus and almost obsession with only generating profits and looking at the world as a win-lose situation. And I think it's time that we start to look at ways where we can create win-win-win situations. So the world is sometimes fed up with politics and looking at business and the leadership of business. And some business leaders are stepping up. We've got Paul Polman, the ex-CEO of Unilever, that has written this fantastic book, Net Positive, where he explains that with the right mindset, companies can give back more than they take. And he is calling for courageous leadership and courageous companies. I obviously fully agree with him. And I believe that business needs to practice conscious leadership. So in 2021, I was honored with my team of winning the Conscious Companies Awards in Africa. And on the panel of the Conscious Companies is Professor Mervyn King, who has done a lot of work globally in writing about governance, oversight, and integral reporting that we are now using as the standard in the world. And having won this Conscious Companies Award, it made me really think deeper about what is conscious companies and how come that conscious companies sounds like such a soft skill, such an abstract thing. Whereas actually, if you think about it, it is, and I will talk to you about how, it is something that can have and deliver hard results. So it's not something fluffy at all, but something that we need to think about concretely. And to aspire my holistic impact ambitions, I've decided to leave my corporate role in Nestlé and to set up my own company, Ubuntu, where I want to help companies on their journey towards more sustainability and promote this conscious leadership in the world. So sometimes people think of companies as being evil and the multinationals doing so much bad in the world. Is that really so? If we actually go back to the first companies, they were actually created in my home country of the Netherlands, when the different businessmen put their money together to finance their big expeditions to trade with Mughal India at that time. And the VOC was the first company. But all the companies that followed since then had to demonstrate to the government how they were able to add value through their services and products to society. And if they weren't able to demonstrate that, they wouldn't get their trade license. So in other words, companies were actually conscious by design. But the limited company, while in the eyes of the law is a person, of course is incapacitated and innate by itself. And it's the leaders, it's us in those companies that are its consciousness. So our actions do matter. Another thing that influenced me in terms of thinking about how to have this conscious leadership approach is coming from my hometown of Rotterdam, back in Holland, where the football club Feyenoord has this song, Geen woorden maar daden. Not words, but deeds. So it's about what you're doing, and everybody needs to be intrinsically motivated and take personal action. But then also, having moved around the world, I came across this beautiful concept in Africa. Now, in the West, we tend to be very individualistic, and in the developing world, it's more about the collectivism. And this spirit of Ubuntu, I am because we are, is beautiful. And I just want to illustrate it with this little story. The story goes that there was this anthropologist from the West that came to Africa to study the tribes. And he did a little experiment with the children. He got the children of the village together, and under the tree he put a basket full of ripe fruits. And he told the children, I'm going to count down from 10, and then the first one that gets to the fruits can have the whole basket for himself. So he did the countdown, and then what happened was really amazing, because the children were actually grabbing each other's hands and walking to the fruits together, so they could sit around and eat the fruits together. And that is the spirit of Ubuntu. And I think the key lesson there is, again, if we all work together, we will be able to enjoy the fruits of our labor together as well. The last part where we'll talk about my influence is that I grew up in a part of the Netherlands that is below sea level. And they call that a polder. So the polder is reclaimed land and obviously protected by the dikes that keep the ocean at bay. And this was actually already being constructed in the 14th, 15th century in the Netherlands. And at that time, to keep the polder safe, everybody had to work together. Whether you're rich, poor, black, white, whatever religion, didn't matter, because you had the common enemy and you had to work together to protect the polder. And that approach has stuck in the Netherlands. And also in the way they do their government, it's run in a seeking consensus approach, where the government always works together with the private sector, as well as labor, by the way, on a wide variety of subjects. And this working together, this consensus building is called the polder model. And it's done very well for them. And in fact, isn't it amazing how such a small, tiny country with very little sun, very little land, very few people, is actually the second largest exporter of agricultural products in the world. So clearly, something that they're doing there is working. And I think that the key lesson is really we need to expand the field, create an ecosystem, and work together in that ecosystem. So in the context of a company, of course, if I take Nestlé, for example, it's more than just sourcing, manufacturing, and distribution. You have to look at the whole ecosystem with all the partners and all the stakeholders, and then try actively to find where are the common resources, where are the links, and where can we work together. So that we move away from a model where the inputs lead to waste at the end of the day, to a model where you use that waste as an input for other value creation value streams. And the key here is that where we often get it wrong, we say the concept of circularity is nice, but we forget that it's not necessarily your core strength that need to be used. And just look at nature to get inspiration. Because in nature, when the leaf falls from the tree, it doesn't become a new leaf, but it gets compost, and then the worms eat it, and the chicken eat the worms, and the fertile ground feeds the tree again. So the way of thinking about circularity is different from the Henry Ford single line approach, and that is what we need to realize. So on circularity, the father of circularity, Professor Gunther Pauli, with The Blue Economy, another book that I highly recommend that you read. But to make it not about the theory, but show you some concrete examples, let me show you some examples of the last 5 years that I worked on myself. The first one is the model called REAL, Realizing Enabled and Empowered African Livelihoods, where we worked with the Makoba tribe. They were dispossessed from their lands in the apartheid days, and then when they got their lands back, there was actually nothing there, and they had to build up their whole community from scratch. So we worked with them to set up a dairy farm, but then we worked together on also finding new ways and think more creatively. So they had a lot of black wattle, which is an alien species that sucks up a lot of water. And they always had to cut it down and get rid of it. And we actually did some research, and we said this can be converted into fodder for the cows. And by the way, when we did that, we saw the emissions of the cows also were reduced. They were farting less. We used the dung of the cows also to recuperate energy from it. We replaced the fertilizers that were artificial with chicken dung and many other initiatives. And as a result, these farms now are net zero, and at the same time with a higher productivity of dairy per cow. The next example is, so that was upstream. The next example is in our factories, where in one of the factories we worked with a company called Eco to take the exhaust and convert it from the boiler house exhaust. We converted it into food-grade baking powder, which then we could use in the biscuit making for our Kit Kat confectionery. So full circularity, and the waste becomes all of a sudden a value stream. The next example is actually, here you can see the ladies from the Future of Hope. What we did was we make Nescafe, and in the process of making the coffee, you've got a lot of spent coffee ground. And in the past, we would just burn the coffee ground to get a little bit of energy from it. But we said fundamentally there's a lot of nutrition still left in those spent coffee grounds. And we then worked with this foundation to grow oyster mushrooms that have over 50% protein, so highly nutritious food. And so those ladies were from the community that we trained up, previously unemployed. They could sell part of the harvest for their income, and part of it we dehydrate and reintegrate it back in our Maggi products. So again, circularity and new value streams generated from this waste. And by the way, after the mushrooms have done their work with the spent coffee ground, you can actually use it as feed for the chickens, and the chickens lay eggs, so yet another value stream that can come from it. Oh, and the last example I want to share, also downstream, is in Zimbabwe, where we also got the ladies to work, create value by their income, by distributing the products in their neighborhoods. A project actually very similar to what Nestlé has been doing here with BISP, also in Pakistan. So in other words, my message today was about more sustainability in the way you do business should not be seen as a cost or a sacrifice, but should be seen as an opportunity for a real win-win-win for the company, for the organization, as well as for the planet. So we are at the crossroads of opportunity and responsibility. The Ubuntu model shows that there is a way to redefine success, to not have a solitary approach to making profits, but a collaborative journey towards a joint and shared prosperity, so that we shift our focus from finite gains to infinite impact. Thank you very much, and let us work together to build a future where business is not just a force for good, but a force for greatness. Thank you.